You will hear two students talking about a research project they are doing on the topic of recycling. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen and answer questions 21 to 24.
So let's talk about where we've got so far with the research project and then talk about the next steps.
OK. Well, our starting point was that people's enthusiasm for recycling had fallen off locally, and that seemed to be because of lots of rather negative reports in the media. So we agreed to investigate some of those reports.
Great.
Firstly, it was claimed that families are actually recycling less at home than they used to. Well, that's hardly the case, in fact. The local council's figures show that all households have 2 bins, and the amount of rubbish finding its way into the recycling bins, as opposed to the unsorted waste bins, has now risen to 70% of the total, up from 65% last year.
Great. I found much the same story for commercial rubbish. There, the rise has been slightly less, but from a stronger base. Recycling from commercial premises was already at 70% before and has risen to 73% in the last year.
Then there was the story about the size of the bins, that people found having 2 an inconvenience and tended just to use the one. I found a survey the council did on that issue published online. They asked 1 in 10 households and found no evidence of that. Most people welcomed the chance to separate their rubbish.
OK, well, I looked into the issue of what happens to the rubbish. You remember one news story said stuff from the recycling bins was being shipped all the way to China for processing, and another said that most of it ended up in landfill because there wasn't enough capacity at our local recycling plant where it gets sorted and the raw materials reused.
I remember.
Well, it appears that there is some truth in the first of those stories. Some refuse is sold to processing plants abroad, though I didn't find any evidence of that being China. The second point may have been correct in the past, but is no longer the case. A new recycling plant has just opened, and I was invited along to see it.
Brilliant. Before you tell me all about the plant, let's decide who's going to do what in the project.
Well, we're going to share giving the presentation, remember? 50-50, that was our agreement.
Yeah, but if you'd prefer me to take on all of that, I wouldn't mind.
Really?
Yes, because there are some other things that I think you'll do much better.
OK, but what have you got in mind?
Well, I thought we'd need to do some pie charts and bar graphs to show some of the statistical information in the report, and that I'd be pretty hopeless at that.
No problem. I like that sort of thing. I'd also like to do a flowchart showing the process at the recycling plant.
Fine, I'm happy to leave that to you.
But maybe writing the body of the report is more your sort of thing. Getting ideas across clearly and concisely on the page is something I find quite tricky.
OK, I'm up for that. As long as you see to compiling the references and appendices, that calls for your sort of analytical brain.
It's a deal.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
So, tell me what you saw at the recycling plant.
Well, I saw how electronic waste is dealt with.
You mean computers, TVs and stuff?
Exactly.
Does it all get recycled then?
Mostly. Some things which contain toxic materials, and so can't be recycled or reused, go directly to the direct destruction area, But everything else goes into a room where somebody plugs them in and switches them on to see if they work, what they call the testing area.
You mean people throw out perfectly good equipment?
That's right. If it still works or can be put right with a bit of simple maintenance, it can go to the redistribution centre for use by charities and schools and people who couldn't afford new stuff.
Cool. So what happens to the other things which can't be redistributed? What route do they follow?
Well, those items are classed as beyond repair, and they then get assessed and broken down into their constituent parts.
Dismantled, you mean?
Exactly. That happens in the dismantling area. And of course, not all the parts are capable of being recycled, so the next stage is a segregation area, where stuff is divided up into what's recyclable and what isn't.
So the unrecyclable materials get destroyed?
I guess so. I didn't see that part of the process. Anyway, they get removed, and that happens in the segregation area. The same happens to very specific materials that can be recycled directly.
Like?
Well, printer inks, photocopier toner, that sort of stuff has specific chemicals in it that can be recycled as they are. You know, the residues. They're called imaging consumables, so there's a special unit handling those. Another thing that gets special treatment is computer screens, monitors and stuff like that.
There's a special type of recycling known as CRT that applies to them.
That's right. Then the plastics and metals have their own recycling units and get reduced to little pellets or melted down.
Right. So, really impressive.
Brilliant, actually. I can't wait to start work on the flowchart.